Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Lamed Gimel contains three sugyas. The first is we're trying to figure out in what way is carbon me'ila more chomer, stricter than the other karbonos which are brought for an accidental avera, an avera b'shogeg. When that's complete, we'll discuss the source. We'll try to find the source for the halacha that you're not allowed to be makdish, you're not allowed to be mafresh, make teruma, something which is already chametz on Pesach. Two sources for that. Then the Gemara will shift into Hilchos Tumah and Tahara, talking about grapes. And when you squeeze them, how can you squeeze Tameh grapes or squeeze them when you are Tameh without being Metame, the juice that comes out of it? So first of all, we're in the middle of a sugya. We're going to start a few lines into the daf where we ended yesterday's daf. So we are discussing the halacha that carbon me'ila, that is the carbon that you bring if you use hektish items, things belonging to the Beis HaMikdash without permission. How do you know that carbon only applies if you use it b'shoigig, by accident? But if you use it b'mezi on purpose, it does not apply. Now there are a number of other similar halachas where you bring a carbon for something which you do by accident, but not if you do it on purpose, such as chil Shabbos, or eating blood, or eating chaylev, all these things. So the Gemara had originally said you could learn from all those things to me'ila, because those things are stricter than me'ila, and yet you don't bring a carbon if it's done b'mezid. So me'ila, which is not so strict, certainly you shouldn't bring a carbon if it's done b'mezid. The Gemara said no, because there's a way in which me'ila is actually stricter than them, and therefore maybe they, even though they don't bring a carbon b'mezid, me'ila will bring a carbon b'mezid. Now, what is the way in which the Gemara, the Brisa there, thought that the other karbanos are stricter than me'ila, and what is the way in which me'ila is stricter than it? So we had seen that they say that the other ones are stricter than me'ila because they have kares. You do it on purpose, you get kares. In me'ila, there's no kares involved, there's misa b'dei shemayim. So the Gemara said, no, well, me'ila is stricter because it's a misa b'dei shemayim. The Gemara says, well, you can't. It can't both be lighter and stricter at the same time. So the Gemara's first approach, which was the subject of discussion for a proof as to what Rav Papa holds in our previous sugya, but the Gemara's first approach was that me'ila is different. It's stricter in the sense that there is misa b'dei shemayim, even if the amount that you used, that you violated with, was less than a kazayas. The other ones you have to have at least a kazayas share. Now the Gemara has two more approaches. The Gemara's first one comes from Marbre de Ravana, who says that me'ila is different, that you are chayev, you violated, even if you do it shaloi miskavein. That means the carbon that we've seen that you have to bring is when you do something b'shogeg. B'shogeg means where you did it by accident because you didn't realize this was forbidden, or you didn't realize that it's a time in which this forbidden thing applies. So such as Shabbos, you didn't realize that today was Shabbos, you didn't realize that this was a malacha. That's the classic shogeg. That's where you have to bring a carbon for Shabbos, for chaylev, for dam, and for me'ila. Gemara says, what if you didn't realize what you were doing, that you were doing it, which item you were using? Meaning to say, you intended to cut a cucumber, it's Shabbos, and you intended to slice a cucumber. You thought it was detached from the ground, and it turns out that it was attached from the ground. That's not that you did it by accident, you didn't realize it was usher. You knew that it's usher to cut a detached, you knew that it's usher to cut an attached growing cucumber, you just didn't realize that this was an attached cucumber, you thought it was detached. So the Gemara calls that loy miskavin. The Gemara says for Hilchos Shabbos you'd be putter for that, you would not have to bring a carbon, but in Me'ila, if you were to do something like that, such as, for example, if you use wool that belongs to hektish, and you thought that it belonged to chulin, that it wasn't hektish, and you use it. So that's me'ila. But then that's ein miskavin. You didn't realize that it was in the situation which makes it forbidden. So that's how me'ila is stricter, because you're chayav a carbon for that, and you're not chayav a carbon in Hilchos Shabbos for that. And the Gemara's third answer is one level further removed from having kavanah, knowing what you're doing, where you didn't even know what action you were doing. You were intending to do one action and a totally different action came out by accident. So for example, if you were just intending to pick something up and your hand bumped into a cucumber and knocked it off the ground. You were just lifting a cucumber and instead you detached the cucumber. You weren't intending to detach, you weren't intending to cut, you were just intending to move. So, okay, so that's what we call misasek, and there's no carbon for that in Hilchos Shabbos, obviously, but in Me'ila you would have to bring a carbon for that. And the case of that in Me'ila would be that you stretched out your hand to pick something up, and your hand went into a bowl of carbon, a bowl of hektish oil, and now you've anointed yourself with hektish oil, which is Me'ila, but you weren't intending to be anointing anything, you were intending to grab something. So that would be the scenario in which, according to this third answer, Me'ila is stricter than the other Isur. Okay, that concludes that discussion. Now the Gemara says, what is the source of the halacha which we've seen a few dafim earlier, that you cannot make truma out of chametz on Pesach itself. You can't take chametz and say, okay, this is going to be truma. So the Gemara offers two approaches. The first approach is brought by Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and he says, because the pasuk says titein lo, you have to give it to the kohen. You have to be giving it to him in a way that he could use it, should be light, should be useful to him. You can't give him la'oiroi, not for his, but for his fire. Now this is assuming now that chametz is even mutter bahana, even if it's permitted to use for your fire. But this pasuk is teaching me it's got to be something he can eat. It can't be something that he has to burn. So Gemara asks, well, what do you mean? If we know the halacha is you're not supposed to make tamei fruits into truma, but if you do, it works. It does count as truma, but it has to be burned. There's nothing you could do with it. That was Rav Huna bar Yeshua's question. So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak will answer that I'm understanding here that we're only talking about something which was chametz before it ever became chayiv and truma. That means it was chametz on Pesach while it was still growing from the ground, and you separated from the ground and tried to make it truma. Since that's the case, it never had a moment in which it wasn't chametz, in which it was chayiv truma, but it wasn't chametz. Your case of truma tameya, that's where it became tamei after it was already chayiv in truma. It was already detached from the ground. It was a roy. It was able to become truma, and then it became tamei. So it had a time in which it wasn't aser. That's the difference. That's why chametz can't become truma, because we're talking about a case where it was never not chametz from the moment it was roy to be truma, as opposed to tuma. There it was roy. It could have been truma before it became tamei. And the truth is that if it would be vice versa, if it wouldn't be chametz from the time it was growing, or it would be tamei from the time it was growing, which can't possibly be, but then you wouldn't, you would have inverted halachas. You wouldn't be able to bring that as truma, and you would be able to make that to be chametz. Now Rav Huna bar Yeshua himself gives a different answer. He hadn't liked this one. He gives a different answer. He says the source that you can't make chametz into truma is from the pasuk that says it has to be reishis. Should be reishis de gadcha. Should be the first of your grain, meaning to say that everything else follows behind it. It is the leader. It makes all your other grain permitted in some way that they were forbidden before. Now, if it's chametz on Pesach, it's not becoming permitted in any way that it was forbidden before. It was forbidden to eat before, it stays forbidden. It was permitted to burn before, at least according to the opinion of the chametz on Pesach is mutter bahana, and it's still permitted to burn. So the fact that you're taking off truma hasn't created any heter for anything, and therefore it's not a valid taking off of truma. The Gemara now moves on to another sugya in Hilchos Tumah, and this is if you have grapes which are tamei, or if you have a person who's tamei who's squeezing grapes. What is the halacha of the juice that comes out of the grapes? So the Gemara presents, Rav Acha bar Avia said that as long as you squeeze them in an amount which is less than a kabetza, meaning less than the size of an egg, you do not have a large mass of grapes greater than an egg together that you're squeezing, the juice that comes out is actually going to be tahar. And the Gemara says that Rav Acha bar Avia said this over in the name of Rav Yochanan, but Rav Chisda disagreed. He said over to Rav Chisda, who rejected it, and he said, no, it will be tamei. What's the machlokas? The Gemara explains as follows. The halacha is that food and drinks are mekabel tuma. They can become tamei in any amount, even a small amount of them. However, they can't pass tuma onward to a next object unless there is a minimum size. The minimum size of food is the size of an egg. The minimum size of a drink is a revius, a quarter of a log, about 3 to 4 ounces. Says the Gemara, now machlokas is as follows. When you have juice inside a grape, is that juice considered to be juice inside the grape, or is it considered to be part of the grape in a food state, and then when you'll squeeze it, you'll separate juice out of food? You'll separate drink from food. Meaning, do we view the juice inside the grape as if it is grape juice in a bottle? and therefore it's a drink, or do we view it as if it's grapes? It's part of the grape. Now, Acha bar Avia says you view it as a drink. Therefore, it doesn't come in contact with whatever tumah makes the grape tummy. The grape itself is tummy, but the grape can't pass tumah onto the juice because, first of all, the grape is too small. There isn't a minimum size. And second of all, the juice isn't considered to be drink yet, even though it is a liquid. It is separate. It's like in a bottle, but it's not considered to be drink as long as it's inside the grape. So therefore, the juice that's inside the grape becomes tamei, and when you squeeze it, as long as you squeeze it a small amount at a time, less than the size of an egg, there's nothing to be metamei it, and therefore you can get tahar juice out of a tamei grape. And because they disagreed, he said no, even when it's inside, it's all considered part of the grape, it's all considered food, and it becomes tamei like any food. Just when the grape skin became tamei, it became tamei itself. Now the Gemara has two brises on the subject. First of all, we have a brisa that says you're even allowed to squeeze, if you're tamei meis, you're even allowed to squeeze an egg size of grapes, and you won't be metamei it. So there's two things here. First of all, why does Rav Acha bar Avia say only less than an egg? This brisa says even an egg. And second of all, it clearly shows against Rav Chisda. So Rav Acha bar Avia says that brisa says you can squeeze even an exact egg. The point is because once you squeeze it, then it's less than an egg, because you've already squeezed something out of it. And therefore, technically, it's mutter. I didn't want to give you that psak because I'm concerned that if we allow you to do exactly an egg size, you'll end up doing more than an egg size. It's very hard to pinpoint the size exactly. Now, this is a kasha on Rav Chisda, because you see here clearly that you could squeeze it, and the juice that comes out will be tahar. So Rav Chisda says that's talking about where the grapes were never tamei. Even though it says that a tamei person is squeezing them, the grapes don't become tamei because the grapes never became wet, and therefore the grapes are tahar, and the juice inside is tahar. Had they been tamei, I would be right. The juice inside would be tahar, would be tamei as well. Here they're tahar because the grapes never became wet. They become wet when you squeeze out grape juice, which is halachically wine, and therefore it makes them wet with one of the shiva mashkin, one of the 7 liquids that makes it able to be mekabel tuma. But because you're squeezing it in a small amount, and it's less than an egg, even though it becomes wet at the time of squeezing, it is not able to transfer tumah to the liquids itself. Now, the Gemara's second brisa, however, is one which we've seen earlier, which says that if you have olives, and olives is removed here from the gira, so if you have grapes, and tutim, which is berries, so if they're tamei, there's no way you could be allowed to do anything with them. You can't eat them because they're tamei. If they're truma, that is, you can't eat tamei truma, and you can't use it as a fire because they're not flammable. So Gemara says, why isn't there something that you're able to do them? Well, according to you could squeeze out the juice. And as long as you do it in less than an egg size at a time, the juice will become tahar. So it's a proof to Rav Chisda that even when you squeeze out the juice, it will not make the juice tahar. You won't be able to. So the Gemara says, Rav answers, this brisa is concerned about something else. If you would be able to squeeze them, you would be able to get tahar juice out. Here we are discussing keeping them for a long time and squeezing them bit by bit. And we don't want you to do that because you'll end up eating them. While you're squeezing them, even if it's not a long time, Rava doesn't spell out as a long time, by squeezing them, you'll end up coming to eat them. When you're involved in the processing of these tamei fruits, you'll end up eating some of them. Sabai says, who said? Where do we see the halacha that you're not allowed to process tamei foods because you may eat them while you are processing them? It's not true. We see that you're allowed to light a fire with bread or oil of tamei truma. That means you're allowed to use it for something. And we're not concerned that you may end up eating it. So the Gemara says that's different. That's where you do something to make it disgusting so that you won't have any interest in eating it. You place the bread between the firewood, so it comes full of charcoal, and the oil you put in a vile kli, in a disgusting container, so that it's also not attractive and you would never want to eat something like that, and that's what the heter is. Now the Gemara comments on this halacha that you're allowed to keep bread and oil around to use for fuel as long as it's disgusting and you won't eat them. So the Gemara says, what about grains of wheat themselves? Are those considered to be disgusting, or are we afraid that you are going to eat them themselves? So the Gemara quotes a machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, you're allowed to. We're not concerned that you'll end up eating them. But Abaye and Rava, quoting Chizkiah, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Marta and Rav Huna all say you can't, because since the grain doesn't get disgusting, you could just wash it off. We are afraid you're going to eat it. Now, why does Rabbi Yochanan say that we're not concerned? So Gemara says it's talking about where you boiled them up and then they became disgusting. Once they're boiled, they get disgusting very quickly. Similarly, you have the same thing which was said about an incident which quoted by Rav Ashi and Rabbi Avin Bar Achan and Rabbi Yitzchak, that Abishol's one of his jobs was that he made the dough and the bread in Rebbe's house, and he used to fuel the fire with grain, chiti, wheat of truma tameya. So Gemara says, how is he allowed to do that? Maybe you'll end up eating them. And Gemara says, no, they were cooked and therefore became disgusting, and that's why there was no.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.